Lut had sent the bombers that were made by Serpentius to Mangaea. Her plan was simple. She was going to have the heavenly bombers head towards the outskirts of Mangaea, bomb them from the air, and then, once the air defenses are destroyed, move troops in. It seemed perfect. However, one of the lead bombers got on the radio, reported that they saw bogies in front of them, and considering where they're headed, they suggested identifying the bogies as bandits. Now, if you're not up to date on your military aviation lingo, you would know that bogies in the Air Force are referred to as planes of unidentified nationalities. Bandits referred to enemies, basically. One of the lead bombers were saying was that they spotted an unknown aircraft of nationality in front of them, and considering where they're going, it's likely that they are the enemy. In fact, when word reached the other bombers about this, they got into attack formation. The Exorcists on board their bombers headed to their gun bays to prepare to defend. At the time, they did not know how Mangaea knew it, but they underestimated us. You see, Mangaea actually had radars that were specifically designed for something like this. Mangaean radars were both secondary and primary radars. Primary radars are basically what they were back in the day. But the thing is, Mangaean radars are different. Primary radars bounce radio waves off of metal objects like they did back in the day. And secondary radar is what we have nowadays. That gives an aircraft's identification, like altitude, direction, and flight number. Mangaean radars also had the ability to sense angelic blood, which you could say is how we were able to keep track of exorcists in the air, but we didn't really use that. Anyways, when the bombers got within radar range, the radars picked up angelic blood mixed with metal, giving a special color. As such, Mangaean radar operators realized that what they are witnessing are angels and bombers. This was in violation of the non-aggression agreement we signed with Heaven. As such, the Mangaean radar operators slammed the button and sounded the air raid alarms. For Mangaean citizens, the fact that the air raid alarms were going off when it wasn't Extermination Day was worrying. And I realized in that moment when I heard radars, even in the capital, that Heaven was attacking in violation of the treaty. In response, the Mangaean Homeland Defense Air Force launched into action. They were scrambled in the air, racing to intercept the heavenly threat. And what followed was something described as basically in the Battle of Britain, basically. Mangaean fighters opened fire on the heavenly bombers. Their mission was simple: destroy the heavenly bombers before they can even destroy Mangaean airspace. But not even that. They also had to make sure that the anti-aircraft guns and cannons were ready. Mangaea actually prepared for something like this. As such, the crew were well trained and were able to launch in the action. It didn't take them long to be in the formation. In fact, Heaven would be later impressed by how fast Mangaean air forces were able to scramble into the air, and how fast the anti-air defenses were ready. Now, the fight kept going, and bombers and exorcists were killed. However, Heaven tried to get it forward, but the problem is, they underestimated something. Mangaean anti-aircraft have range. Eventually, the Mangaean aircraft broke off a bit. It started pursuit from the tail section. They didn't know why until they heard a bang from the ground. Turns out the heavily bombers had just got within range of the anti-air guns. And what followed was an absolute bloodbath in a sense. You can view it just like the Battle of Tikenhof from Saga Tanya the Evil movie. The bombers were destroyed and didn't even destroy any of the buildings in Mangaea. The closest they were and deepest ever got into Mangaean territory was about 10 feet. But then again, that's because one of the bombers was shot in the air and crashed into Mangian territory. The planes themselves were taken in by Mangian forces and paraded around, showing heavy aggression. To say that Mangia suffered a wave of pro-war is an understatement. You have to remember that Mangia is full of ultra-nationalists, so yeah, Mangia was hyped, to say the least, that they now have a justification to possibly declare war on heaven. In fact, about 3 days after, when everything was ready, a envoy appeared in heaven on behalf of Mangia to the Heavenly Council. But problem is the four that I would normally send, Val, Velvet, Vox, and Alistair, had other business. And Stalin had also had something to deal with back in Mangia with his force, Homeland Defense Forces. So, begrudgingly, I sent Adolf. Yeah, I didn't even like that. Adolf explained how Mangia is not happy and they are angry at their violation of it. Lute simply didn't care. Being basically a warmonger at this point, she said that Mangia had it out for it. Sarah cut Lute off. She said that she does not want war, and as such, she's looking for a peaceful resolution. However, Adolf said that that's likely not the case because Mangia is outraged by it, and say that heaven is evil, even pointing out that Sarah authorized it, and that the head seraphim, who basically runs heaven, has to be the one who have authorized it and think the same. Basically, it all went down similar to when they arrived in Mangia. Wrong timing part, of course, same where Lucifer had came earlier. And of course, Sarah got angry. Said that there is no way that heaven, in a sense, would bow to warmongering and ultra-nationalists, in a sense. Basically, the evil sinners. That she states that exterminations and Mangian anger and nationalism is one of the reasons why she basically authorized the exterminations. Adolf said nothing and somewhat agreed in a sense. But, however, he made one reveal. I, the Kaiser, had not exactly wanted this to end peacefully. I also was outraged, just like my people. Adolf made mention that I have already went forward with the decision. That his real reason for being up here, which is not only to stall, but also to bring forth the Mangia's decision. Adolf took a deep breath in, exhaled, and announced loudly that Mangia had decided to declare war in heaven, and that their bombers and forces are inbound, and that they had at least about 2 hours. In fact, the bombers were already inbound on their way, so he suggests that they prepare their defenses. With that, Adolf left. Again, bombers and fighters were inbound, and our cargo planes carrying soldiers and tanks basically were ready to fly inward. Eventually, they leveled off, entering heaven airspace. The fighters the escort fighters flew inbound. Eventually, smoke screens went off. Now Mangian fighters are basically one of the best fighters of World War II, they had one thing that they had that was different. Smoke screens that gave signals. One color meant that the enemies are spotted from the left, another from the right. One states right down the center. This was how they pilots were able to communicate with others, in case one did not hear. It also removed language barriers. As such, the escort fighters got in a position and opened fire on the exorcist angels who were coming to intercept them. Now, of course, you're probably wondering how it's going to end, but it's basically fighters against angels with wings, so yeah. Obviously, Mangian fighters prevailed. Now, Mangian fighters also dive bomb some sites. eliminating any inferior anti-air guns that Heaven had. And compared to Mangia, Heaven's anti-air guns and cannons were really inferior. They didn't actually have the ceiling height needed to take out Mangian bombers. Anyways, as Mangia flew over bases, they basically dropped bombs and leveled it. Mangian air doctrine is to basically reduce stuff to rubble in sense. Basically, carpet bomb the crap out of places. After the bases and whatever buildings were destroyed, Mangia then had their fighters dive bomb the gates. As such, the gates were very destroyed, which meant all the tanks had to do was roll over them, which happened. Suddenly, Mangian boots began to hit Heaven soil running. As such, Heaven found itself in a dilemma that they did not want to find themselves in. They were being invaded by Mangia. The war would be brutal. Mangian forces kept pushing. Compared to Heaven's updated quote-unquote weapons, they were inferior. Mangia had World War II era guns, tanks, and all such. However, Heaven only had World War I era, which was about around the same time Serpentius would have died. As such, it goes without saying. Heaven's tanks' armor were thin and were basically destroyed easily by Mangian tanks. In fact, that Heaven only had possibly a limited number of Exodus Angels, depending on how they are actually made. It's safe to say that Mangia steamrolled, as they could clone own soldiers and have an unlimited amount of them. So yeah, Mangia kept pushing in, kept conquering new cities and stuff, kept pushing and pushing deeper inwards, leaving more and more buildings to ruin by aerial bombing. Heaven's air defenses were inferior to this type of warfare, in a sense. Heaven seemingly stood no chance. Eventually, it came to uphill, where Heaven was tired of it and wanted the war to end. Anti-war sentiment grew louder and louder with more ground the Mangians took. To say that Heaven had a chance to withstand Mangian forces is an understatement. They could not handle it. But then, it would come. Mangia has been working on a secret project that they called Project Trinity. This project would involve one famous person in history, Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. He was brought in for a secret Mangian project that he had sworn to secrecy to not reveal or make mention of. It would be something that he did that ended World War II in our world, and most likely the Hellverse's world. This came to a head when the testing began. After research in atomic knowledge and research with angelic stuff, in collaboration with Carmine, we did it. Then, one night, we tested the bomb. It dropped. The countdown went off in German. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Suddenly, the explosion went off. We were all wearing safe glasses that allowed us to look at the explosion and not go blind, like Oppenheimer and the others wore, most likely, when they were testing Trinity during the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb. The explosion was big. In fact, it was possibly bigger than Little Boy, which was dropped on Hiroshima. as I would find out later, it was 2 times the size. Oppenheimer was shocked. This could possibly end the war in heaven. This could possibly end the Heaven-Mangean War. But it would be very destructive. Famous words came out of my mouth. Was something Oppenheimer remembered because he also muttered them. I have become deaf, destroyer of worlds. Eventually, the bomb was loaded onto a bomber. Now, before I get to the nuking of it, I should probably mention something. Mangaea has a very specific policy when it comes to invading that they have. You see, with the territories that are basically occupied by them during the war, they were basically being rebuilt. For those who were unable to evacuate and were caught on the Mangaean side of the lines, they were given free food. And as such, relations with Mangaea with the winners left behind on the Mangaean side actually improved a bit. Even one angel, Emily, was also caught on the Mangaean side. Right? Ended up seeing the Mangaeans as people who actually care. So Emily figured that might be the case. She also knew what Mangaea was doing with the angels left behind after the examination. Mangaea was respectful and returned the dead back to heaven. And they took care of the injured until they were able to return back to heaven. Emily found something stirring inside of her and wondered the big question. Why are we against them? Why are we against people of this kind? Emily would continue to wonder this. Eventually, the bomb flew over her heaven. Heaven's air defense forces were ready to lock on it, but, however, they chose not to. It was just one bomber that was shocked. Mangaea usually sent a whole fleet of them, but one bomber? Heaven thought nothing about it, and as such, the Mangaean bomber flew overhead, seemingly with no resistance. Heaven's hubris and judgment would prove direly fatal. Then it came. The bomb bay door opened, and they were approaching the target. Countdown German went down, and eventually the bomb was dropped. The Mangaean bomber then turned sharply to make a sharp U-turn. The bomb fell, and any Japanese winner who survived, who basically was either survived or didn't survive during the bombings of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, was wondering one question: is it happening again? They would eventually realize that was the case, but to be dead before they even realized it. The bomb hit. Anyone in the immediate zone, or anyone at ground zero or the blast zone immediately, were vaporized. Buildings were destroyed. Glass windows shattered and such. Everyone was flown away. A number of winners who realized that that's actually a nuclear bomb flew as fast as they could. A number of them were caught in a blast, and either had their wings burned or hit by the shockwave. It was chaos. It's estimated that over 500,000 people died in it. Winners and heavenborn. All those 500,000 people died. 200 more would be injured. This was shocking. In fact, news had quickly reached Sarah and Lute. Sarah was shocked. Mangaea had created a weapon of mass destruction that could eliminate them. They found a way to split not just the atom, but the angelic atom, creating an angelic nuclear bomb. This was something she feared. She realized this was one of the justifications she had in continuing exterminations, but she herself was worried. Now that Mangaea had an atomic angelic nuclear bomb, they could use it again and kill more. So, she requested to Mangia a broadcast, which will also have broadcasted all throughout heaven. Mangia accepted. Her video recording, live video broadcast, was shown throughout heaven. The ceasefire on both sides was called to allow the recording to go out. And not even that, but it was being broadcast everywhere. Not just in heaven, in Mangia, but all throughout hell, thanks to Mangian rules reach of radio waves. In fact, Alistair also had the recording play, but through the radio. Sarah announced that Mangia had found a way to create an angelic atomic bomb, and to protect her people from the further destruction that could follow by another bombing from that angelic nuke. On behalf of heaven, she had announced that heaven is surrendering to Magian forces and hoped to bring an end to it. I immediately jumped on the broadcast and announced that Mangia hereby accepts that their surrender, that I would be up to sign the treaty, all fighting to stop. And that indeed happened. When Mangia heard it, they were full of extreme nationalism. They did something seen as impossible even, to hell. They won a war against heaven. Magian forces stayed, and heaven was prepared to sign whatever treaty would come. In fact, it would. In fact, my arrival would be ceremonial, in a sense. Similar to Aladdin, and when he showed up in Akbar, in the movie, Aladdin. But the thing is, my soldiers were actually praising me, in a sense. They were basically demonstrating Mangian might. In fact, I didn't even stop them. Eventually got them down from practically afloat, in a sense, and began to walk towards them. Soldiers presenting their arms. And I walked as I stared forward, observing heaven. This was a place people considered paradise. Now, behind me, was nothing but ruined buildings and rubble. The table was set. After basically I had a friendly shake, I then presented the treaty. The terms were that heaven had to take responsibility for the war, being responsible for the attack, had to re-sign a non-aggression agreement which could cost them their sovereignty if they'd pulled another stunt like this again. And besides that, they would also have to pay reparation. I would not make heaven a puppet government. No, I would not do it that way. Not yet, at least. I would go against my plan. But besides that, it was going according to it. Sarah looked at it. She realized that if she signed this, she would having to admit to everyone that she lost. She failed. But the fact that Mangia had an angelic atomic bomb worried her more. So she swallowed her pride and signed it. The war was over. Eventually, Mangian forces would pull out. When I and my soldiers returned, we returned to a fanfare that was huge. My citizens cheered me. They cheered, "Long live the Kaiser! Long live Mangia! Glory to Thomas!" They praised me. In fact, because Mangia won a war against them, nationalism was at an all-time high, and it would continue for years onward. Lutz was pissed royally. she realized that they lost, that it was her fault. In fact, she would face a demotion in a sense, but that she faced the dishonor of being responsible for the war, a war that heaven lost. Emily would shake her head and say, "You know, this is something you should not have done. This cost us our pride. We lost a war because of you. What heaven feared, you caused. How does it feel to be responsible for heaven's loss?" Luke was pissed. She was angry. She made a fist. She wanted to punch Emily. She wanted, but she couldn't. She couldn't punch the seraphim. Instead, Luke sighed and looked at Emily and said, "You're right. Perhaps I shouldn't have done it." Now, you would probably say that's out of character for Luke, but you have to bear in mind, she actually was responsible for the war. She had Serpentius make the bombers. But she ultimately gave the order to send the bombers out against Abel's orders. She didn't even consult Abel about it. This was insubordination, so Luke decided that she ultimately would take responsibility since even she admitted it was her fault. I sat down on my throne and smiled. As Adolf and Stalin left, Mayor Schmidt arrived to my side and said, "You know, I expected you to make them a puppet sting, just because from this victory. Or are you waiting for something?" I looked at her like, "Oh, please, it's not even over yet. Besides, our victory and the terms are but a provocation. I have poked the bear, and eventually the bear will send its forces, at which point we will stop them." She looked at me like, "How?" I looked at her and smiled, said nothing. A brief pause between us went on until eventually Miss Schmidt smiled. She realized something. I had not left heaven without figuring out a way to counter something like that. Because she realized something. I had cemented something to heaven. You attack Mangaea, Mangaea will invade you. Heaven would have to figure out another way to destroy Mangaea. Direct confrontation was something they could not risk. In fact, if they violated the treaty again by pulling off another bomber invasion, then they could be annexed or become a puppet government. Heaven had actually realized this, so Heaven would have to take steps to not be annexed like that. As such, the Cold War between Heaven and Mangaea began. Heaven will have to figure out a way to destroy Mangaea without being annexed or violating the non-aggression treaty. As such, political tensions would rise between us. They would be at an all-time high. Mangaea, in a sense, you could say, was the Soviet Union, due to our intelligence gathering and counter-espionage, in a sense. Heaven would be America. How would this all play out? Well, I'm glad to say that you are going to hear that next time. Anyways, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and like the video, and let me know, to know when I make a new video. Sorry for the huge delay, but I had to get a new computer due to something that happened on New Year's. I don't want to talk about it, but just know that I am now back making regular videos. Usually. Though, they may come Monday to Friday, since I now have a job that's casual that may run on weekends. But other than that, hope you like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, be notified when I make a new video. And if you can, and put a congratulations in the bottom in the comment section, since as of last week, I had actually graduated from high school. Wish me luck. Anyways, after all that stuff, like, comment, subscribe, make sure heard Like, comment, subscribe, ring bell, and notify when I make a new video. Have a good day and see you all next time. Goodbye!